And thank you to Giancarlo for inviting me to Puerto Rico. And thank you for everyone for giving such a warm welcome. What an amazing, amazing country. I wish I could stay longer. But if you remember one thing I say today in the next 20 minutes, it's this slide. Fortune favors the bold. Okay? And don't waste a crisis. Be bold. So scroll back 25 years. I was a student. I was pretending to do an engineering degree, but really just messing around on the internet. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And I walked into a newsagent's one day, a shop, and I saw a magazine, and it changed my life. Just the cover changed my life. And this was the magazine, and this was the cover. It was a copy of Wired magazine. And the cover was featuring an article claiming Thomas Paine, the philosopher, to be the kind of philosopher king of this digital revolution that was just about to hit society, culture, democracy, government. And the phrase, the article's actually not very good. Don't bother to find it. But that headline hit me between the eyes. We have it in our power to begin the world again. I knew in my bones that the internet, that digital technology, was going to challenge and change everything. I'd seen enough, even in the early 90s, to know it was going to challenge and change everything. And I knew that we did have the power to begin everything again, begin the world again. And I just dropped everything. I went, I have to be part of this. I have to go and work for this magazine. I have to be a journalist. I have to do this. And I was lucky enough to be able to do that. But my reflection today in 2017, when I see this, when I read that headline, I think two things differently. I reflect upon the fact that, yep, we are reinventing, beginning the world again. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's better than the one that came before. It doesn't necessarily mean it's worse either. It means we have an obligation to reinvent that world according to values that we all believe in for society and democracy. And secondly, I ask the question, who are the we? Who's the we that is doing that reinventing? Is it people here in this country reinventing the world? Or is it people outside your country, outside your control, doing it for you? Okay. Big reflections for me. So who am I? What do I do today? Well, I work with two former colleagues from the Government Digital Service, and we help governments transform what they do digitally. We've worked in large organizations all our life, in governments. We work with governments around the world. There's a few of them there. I'll tell you one little thing. I spent 7 years helping the BBC transform digitally. After fighting with the BBC for 7 years, no government is a real challenge. Okay. So we help governments and large organizations succeed in digital transformation at scale. Now, what do I mean by the word digital? Well, my definition is this. It's applying the culture, practices, processes, and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations, those raised expectations that Giancarlo mentioned earlier. People expect magic. People expect to hit a button and get an Uber to come. Where's that magic in government? We need that magic to meet people's expectations. It's not really about technology. It's about the imperative to redesign public services to work better and cost less. They've got to be miles better to meet those expectations, but the money's gone. We have to save big money, and you can do both. You can do both. In fact, you're more likely to succeed if you aim to do both. Don't just try and save the money. Try and transform the quality of the services, and then you'll save the money. That way around. So in 2010, after the financial crisis in the UK, we were invited into the UK government by a new government. And we founded a new institution of government, the Government Digital Service in the United Kingdom. And we spent 5 years radically transforming how the UK government approached designing and delivering public services. Now, one metric that I'm very proud of is to say in 2008, we were 8th globally in the United Nations ranking for e-government. By 2016, we're first. That's great, but you know, that's the United Nations. The number I'm as proud of is this one, 4.1 billion pounds, which is how much money we saved in the 4 years of that parliament. Okay? That's not nothing. Now let me explain how we save the money. Okay? Okay? We save the money by doing two things at the same time, in parallel. Number one, we stopped the big IT self-harm. Okay? What do I mean by that? I mean that the money you needed to spend in the 1980s and 1990s to automate your services should now be 9 times, 10 times cheaper today. You don't need to spend the billions. The UK was spending £16 billion a year on IT. Okay, with 90% of that spend was with 8 large software providers, systems integrators, none of which were British. Okay, so the first one, stop that self-harm, challenge that spend. Technology gets cheaper year on year. Why are we spending more on IT year on year? I tell you why, because the vendors could get away with it. Okay, because the government is seen as a soft touch, no more. From 2010, UK government, not a soft touch. Second thing we did, though, in parallel, was start to redesign those public services digitally, using the culture, processes, practices, and technologies of the Internet era. And the minister, Francis Maude, who invited us into government, he said when we joined, he said, don't waste this crisis. Crises are terrible, painful things, but they're an opportunity for radical change that would otherwise be really, really hard, if not impossible. And one of the first things he did, by way of example, is he sent us to South Wales, to Swansea, where the motoring agency of the UK government was. And this is that agency. This is their building. This is where all the driving licenses were produced. This is where all the vehicle tax discs that you have to stick on the window of your car were published. And if you look very closely at this photo, you won't be able to see it. There's a loading bay there of 30 bays for articulated 40-ton lorries full of paper. They were all the driving licenses, paper, going out in post through the mail. All the vehicle tax going out in letters through the post. That's a paper factory. Quite an efficient paper factory, actually. But in 2010, having a paper factory, really? When we went into that organization, we found that the software partner was on the board of that organization. And they were spending hundreds of millions of pounds a year keeping 1980s technology up to date. There was no room for anything new because it was so... And this is Mike Bracken, my partner, standing in front of the architecture diagram that was literally like a sea of spaghetti. Okay. Impossible to understand. Nobody understood the architecture anymore. It's so good to be so complicated. So we had to do some radical things. We had to find a new chief executive, sadly. That was the first step. Sometimes you have to do painful things. Okay. Sometimes you have to find new leadership. We had to do that. But secondly, we took the opportunity to be bold. And rather than saying, how do we make this paper factory really efficient using technology? We said, why do we need the paper? Why do we need it? Why do we need this disc in the windscreen of my car to prove it's been taxed? Need the tax? Who uses this paper disc? We have a database with all the vehicles that are taxed. The police use that. The police don't use this disc. Local authorities don't use this disc. Who uses this disc? The answer? Nobody. It was there because it was there because it was there. And very quickly we were able to say, let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of the disc. Let's keep taking the tax. And if we're going to get rid of it, let's look again at how we can make it simpler and cheaper for people. The way you got that disc, most people would go to the post office with a letter and a form every year, once a year, with a check or a credit card and queue in the post office, fill in the form and get there, 5 days later through the post you'd get your disc. Once a year is a hassle. And if you sold your car in the middle of the year, you had to reclaim the months of tax that you'd spent at the start of the year, and you get some money back from the government for having some tax left over. Well, what a hassle. So we said, let's make it monthly, and let's make it payable by direct debit. So that when I get a new car, I can sign up once online, the money will come out of my account every year, and I do not have to think about it ever again until I sell my car. And that's how the vehicle tax system now works in the UK. No disc, monthly payment, direct debit. From a citizen's perspective, I don't have to think. We saved hundreds of millions. Cheaper IT costs, more efficient. How do I know we saved hundreds of millions? I'll show you in a minute. Second thing, so that's the service, that's what it looked like. Second thing, driving licenses. For strange reasons that no one could quite remember in the UK, to have a valid driving license, you needed a plastic EU disc card with a photo driver's license, but you also needed a piece of paper, the green piece of paper in the background there, which all it had on it was how many points you had on your license for speeding. Okay, but if you wanted to prove that to a hire car company or an employer that you are legal to drive, you had to show both. Real hassle to carry both around. Okay. Again, you go, why do we have the paper driving license? And the policy people would say, well, we haven't been able to find a way to store the points on this plastic credit card license. So we said, okay, let's do that online. Let's put the driving license online, and then let's find secure ways to allow you to prove to a car hire company, to an employer, how many points you've got digitally without giving them full access to your driving license. I don't want to give an employer of a hire car company full access to my driving license online, but I can give them a one-time use code for them to log in, type that code in, and they can see how many points I've got, and that's it. That's enough for them. That's minimal risk for me. Nice, simple Airbnb-style service design, got rid of the paper driving license. You have a minister standing up in front of the cameras, ripping up their driving license. Paper driving, you don't need this anymore. Big political win, and it saved money. Better for less. Now when you go to Swansea, they have a relationship with the university locally to retrain some of the workers there to be digitally skilled so they can get other jobs, maybe in the motoring agency, maybe elsewhere. Next example. The biggest catastrophe we had in the 2010 to 2015 Parliament was called universal credit. Universal credit was a radical reinvention of how welfare worked in the UK, a massive simplification of welfare. Not quite what Giancarlo described around getting your unemployment benefit the day you go redundant, but the ambition was close to that. Dynamic benefits that adjust to your circumstances, replacing 6 different benefits, 20 million people, live made easier. 2010, this was started. 2013, I had to be on a team that stopped it. Okay, it was a catastrophe. This is from Parliament. This is the chair of the Accounts Committee, the Public Accounts Committee, saying its implementation has been extraordinarily poor. They'd spent £400 million, 3 years, no users, nothing had been delivered. Guess who the vendors were? I don't need to say. 2 years later, if you went in to see Universal Credit, this is what you would see. You would see a team of people from a variety of different disciplines, developers, designers, policy people, lawyers, operations people, security people, in a room working in a digital way, iteratively, incrementally, just like you would find in Airbnb or Google or Amazon. Working that way, they delivered a service at 90% less cost than that £425 million. That's what you should expect. You should expect things to cost 90% less, not 10% less, 90% less, if you work this way. To work this way requires massive change to how government works and thinks, who it hires, how it procures, how it governs things. It's not easy, but you can get 90%. Don't waste the crisis. We wouldn't have got that team working that way at 90% less if they hadn't wasted £400 million and been absolutely slaughtered in Parliament. That was the crisis that was needed to precipitate that team's creation and those conditions for them to succeed. What changed? They started working digitally. Another quick example. 2010, there were 2,500 government websites. They only had one thing in common. That's that they all were different, and they all looked different. Okay? They cost nearly £200 million a year to run. You only need one website if you're the government. Keep it simple. Close them all. Replace them with one website. www.gov.uk. Really simple. Simplify the language. Simplify the user journey. Google loves it, so you find things more easily. If you've learned how one bit of the government works online, you've learned how all bits of the government online work. Again, save, not quite 90%, but not far off. And by the way, it won Design of the Year. Okay? The first website to win, the first government service ever to win. Again, a political prize, not just a financial prize. How do you scale this impact? How do you drive this kind of transparency? Well, I'm a great believer that sunlight is a great disinfectant. Transparency can really drive savings. So one of the first things that we did in government was ask departments and agencies, what services do you run? What public services do you run? Can you give me their names? How often are they used? What do they cost? Took about 6 months of discussions for people to accept that they needed to share that information and maybe list what services they run. Some departments didn't even know what services they ran. We then published that data online on gov.uk/performance, a list of 801 services that the UK central government offers. And alongside that, we demanded data from departments and agencies. How much does the service cost? How many people use it? What's the completion rate? How successful is the service in terms of people getting through it? And then we publish it online. So we can find out what's the cost per transaction of every one of those 800 services. What's the completion rate? How many people are completing it? Are you getting better? Are you getting cheaper? Just by publishing that data, you spot the outliers. Which service is costing £700 per transaction? Okay. Given that service was meant to be giving away money, probably best just to turn it off, which is what they did. Okay. But you could also see services that were doing really well and be able to pair them up with another similar service and go, you should learn from that service. They've got a cost per transaction way lower than yours. Their satisfactions and completion rates way greater. Just by getting that simple data. That took a lot of meetings and difficult conversations to force departments and agencies to publish that data. But transparency, sunlight is a great disinfectant. So we did this initially just for 25 services. You can't just introduce this way of working across the whole 800 services. But the ambition, so we did 25, and the ambition was to get 90% less. And I'm going to take a risk now, and I'm going to show you one of those services. Now, when I worked at the BBC, there was a saying, never perform with children or animals in front of an audience. Because children and animals, you can't trust them. I would add a third thing, never to do in front of an audience, and that is give a live internet demo. Okay? I'm about to break that rule, so bear with me. Okay? I'm going to try and give a live internet demo. And I want to ask you to imagine that you are my wife. My wife is a beautiful woman, but she's quite a lot older than me. I love her dearly. She's quite a lot, and she's not a million miles away. It's a good job she's not here. She's not a million miles away from getting a pension. Okay? But she doesn't know how much pension she's going to get, right? Because the rules are complicated. You know, how many years have you worked? Discounts, da-da-da-da. But she needs to know. So how is she going to find out? Well, typically, up until 2 or 3 years ago, she'd ring up the Department for Pensions and go, how much pension am I going to get? There'd be a long conversation, a confused conversation. The poor person on the end of the line would kind of not have the data in front of them. They'd have to go back to them, bring them back, write a letter, da-da-da-da-da. Maybe a month later, my wife may or may not find out how much pension she will get in a few years' time when she retires. Big cost to government, unhappy citizen. Okay. Scroll forward to today. What do? Well, you go to Google, like most human beings. You don't go to the homepage, you just go to Google and you go check state pension. Oh, look, we've made sure we're number 1 because our website's good. So we're the first link in Google. Okay? You don't have 2,500 websites confusing Google. There's one website, the right link's at the top. That's a big deal. That saves a lot of hassle. I click on the link. I want to check my pension. I've learned how every government service works online, so I know how this works. I've used lots of things like this before. I'm going to log in and prove that I am who I say I am. I'm not going to dwell on this, but you can prove who you say you are in the UK government through third party, through your bank or through the Royal Mail or through the Post Office. I'm going to use this company. It's a Dutch company who I trust to validate my identity. They should be now sending me a text message all the way from Holland. This is when the demo really starts to hurt. Yes, and it's come through. Whew. That's the scariest point over. And now I'm going to be able to prove to the government that I am who I say I am, and hopefully it's going to tell me how much pension I'm going to get. Let's find out if it works. Yes. That's how much pension I'm going to get. Okay. Now that's a little thing, right? That's a little thing. How much easier was that for me or my wife than sitting on the phone and letters? How much money have we saved the pensions department? 60% of the phone calls the pensions department were getting, 60% were asking that question. How much pension am I get was 60% of their demand. How much does that save? That's big savings by doing some very simple Airbnb-style service design, elegantly simple. Do the hard work to make it simple for citizens, then you'll save the money that way round. Do the hard work to make it simple, you'll save the money. Right. Thank heavens that worked. I'm never doing a live internet demo again, especially involving text messages from Holland. Right. So the approach that we really pioneered in the UK has been adopted around the world. So if you go to Canada now, the US Digital Service, the Canadian Digital Service, the Australian Digital Transformation Agency, New Zealand, Singapore, blah, 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 lots of countries working this way. And some of them are doing fantastic things. They're doing some different things from the UK, but they're following the same core principles. Internet era ways of working gives you better for less. Okay? If you're bold and challenge the bureaucratic and the bureaucracy way of working, be bold and you'll get the savings. But I have a reflection to end with, which is one big lesson from working with all these different countries in the UK, is it felt pretty bold for the 5 years that I was inside the UK government. It felt like we were being really disruptive, challenging some real deep-seated ways of working and practices and hierarchies. But I don't think we were bold enough with hindsight. I don't think we were nearly bold enough. I don't think we're even close to being bold enough in retrospect. I wish we'd been bolder, because on the wall of government, of GDS, the Government Digital Service, one day one of the designers put this up. He said, I've done some user research with some citizens and asked them what do they want from government, and this is what they want. They want a website that just says, sort it out for me. Okay, just sort it out for me. That's what Airbnb would do, right? You just sort it out for me, for government. That's the internet magic. And that's what citizens want, and why shouldn't they get it in 2017? Okay? My reflection is that nearly everything I'd done in the UK government had been working with existing agencies and departments and iterating what they always did before. We hadn't really changed any institutional architecture. We hadn't said, why do we have 350 agencies? Why? We'd helped a lot of them be far more effective and efficient, but I still don't know why we had 350. Airbnb does not have 350 departments. Now, I know I'm being facetious, but you get my point. We were digitizing a paper-based government. The reason you have 350 agencies in the UK government is because if the only technology you have is paper, you need that many. Because you can't copy and share information quickly with paper. You can with digital. And so if I wanted to start a company in maybe 20 years ago in the UK, I was an entrepreneur, I wanted a company, I wanted to register with the company register, the tax authorities, I wanted licenses, I wanted to employ people. I would need to do that via post with a whole bunch of different agencies. If I'd done that, tried to do that 7 years ago in the UK, a lot of those individual agencies, actually, a lot of them had kind of got online. They all looked different, it was all higgledy-piggledy and a bit of a mess. But some of them had kind of gone online, but it was still a bit of a nightmare. When I left government, this is what it looked like. This is all the start pages of all the different agencies of government that, as an entrepreneur, I might have to engage with now. I wouldn't have to engage with all 110 of them, but I might have to easily engage with 15 of them, different agencies. Now, each of those 15's online services were pretty good. They worked pretty smoothly, but I still had to engage with 15 bits of government to start a business. Would Airbnb design a service that way? No. Why does the government? Because it's not bold enough to challenge its institutional architecture, that's why. That's why I say don't waste this crisis. Don't waste this crisis. I feel slightly we wasted ours in 2010-11. Don't waste yours. You should expect internet magic with your public services. And the first country to really design new institutions that make the most of digital technology is going to win, and win big. Absolutely convinced about this. And I give this message to all our clients. Why not your country? Why not Puerto Rico? Why not? I can think of loads of reasons why not. But why not? So to finish, I'm going to talk to the fiscal board. And I say, where do you start that journey? There's not somewhere you can get overnight, but where do you start? And I would recommend 3 places to start today. Firstly, give a strong mandate to challenge IT spend across all your departments and agencies. You are spending money like it's the 1990s and it's 2017. You can save tens of millions just by challenging. Why are we spending so much? Tell me, why are we doing the same thing again in 3, 4, 10 different areas of government? Secondly, start small by doing this really simple service design. A bit like the team that did Universal Credit. Find those 6 or 10 people who can show you how to develop really magically simple public services using this digital way. Don't expect you to do that everywhere across government, but at least start in one place and be bold in how you develop it. And finally, this is a kind of critical, unsexy, but vital enabler. To do this, you're going to need to fix your procurement, because your procurement process will inevitably be biased towards the big vendors, because only they can afford to engage with you through a complex and convoluted procurement process. Simplify, level the playing field for procurement, and you'll get benefits from a diversity of suppliers and help the ecosystem. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, and I look forward to it.